From the campaign trail to Capitol Hill, buckle up because the Hill is rewinding the politics, events, and power players that have shaped our national headlines.
President Trump warning Iran Monday that the U.S. may carry out another strike if it reestablishes its nuclear program.
That comment coming as the president welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to his Mar-a-Lago home on Monday. Take a listen.
I hope they're not trying to build up again, because if they are, we're going to have no choice but very quickly to eradicate that buildup. So I hope Iran is not trying to build up, as I've been reading that they're building up weapons and other things. And if they are, they're not using the sites that we obliterated, but they're using possibly different sites. We know exactly where they're going, what they're doing.
Trump also suggested that he would support an Israeli attack on Iran if they begin to rebuild their nuclear program. Now, for those concerned that repeated strikes may kick off another war in the Middle East, I've got bad news. Iranian officials seem to think they're already at war. The Iranian president declared over the weekend he believed Iran was, quote, in a full-fledged war with America, Israel, and Europe, adding that, quote, they do not want our country, Iran, to stand on its feet.
Now, Trump's former UN ambassador and frequent critic, Nikki Haley, pounced on the Iranian president's comments, writing on X, "This is exactly why President Trump was right to strike Iran's nuclear sites. We should take them at their word. No deal will change what Iranian regime believes. They don't think Israel or the United States should exist. Countering them means being clear-eyed about who they are and standing with Israel." And Democratic Senator John Fetterman echoing that in his own post, writing, "Iran can't ever develop a nuclear weapon. Fully supported the strike earlier this year, fully support any future strikes to damage or destroy their nuclear ambitions." And Trump's former lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, took it a step further in an appearance on Newsmax. Let's take a look.
There'll never be peace in the Middle East unless there's regime change in Iran. The current Iranian regime is the major barrier to peace in the Middle East. And if President Trump wants to be known as the peace president, he has to be in support of regime change. And then there can be deals with Saudi Arabia and all the other deals.
On a separate front, the administration appears to be turning up the pressure on Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro.
Trump confirmed in a radio interview on Friday that the strikes have been carried out on land targets in Venezuela. He said that the U.S., quote, knocked out a big facility, but didn't give many more details. Trump was asked about it yesterday, and here's what he said.
There was a major explosion in the dock area where they load the boats up with drugs. They load the boats up with drugs, so we hit all the boats, and now we hit the area. It's the implementation area. That's where they implement, and that is no longer around.
The New York Times is reporting that the CIA conducted the strike on a dock where officials believe Tren de Aragua was storing narcotics and potentially moving those drugs onto boats. They report that no one was on the dock at the time and no one was killed. Regime change, regime change, regime change. Venezuela, Dershowitz wants us to do regime change in Iran. That sounds very costly and messy and bloody and not even necessarily likely to produce a subsequent regime that would be better than the current Iranian regime. What evidence do we have of that? So that's a utterly ridiculous idea. Doing regime change in Venezuela is comparatively not as nearly as crazy as doing it in Iran. I'm still very reluctant to say that it's a good strategy. It's certainly not a strategy that should be pursued, in my view, without congressional accountability occurring first. The strikes to take out the nuclear program in Iran were not aimed at regime change. They were aimed at thwarting Iran's nuclear ambitions. I had a lot of skepticism of that kind of approach anyway. Iran is not a threat to us. They're not a threat to the U.S. of A. They're a threat to Israel, maybe. So that sounds like a them problem, not an us problem, and I resent being dragged into Israel's war, again, without any congressional say-so. We cannot outsource our foreign policy decisions to a different nation. It is our job to determine what foreign policy makes sense for the U.S. and its citizens, not for some other country. So this is me at my most, America first, Israeli skeptical. It's not, we get to decide our foreign policy, not them. And I don't like that.
The biggest thing to me is the America first piece piece, and the fact that everybody, for the most part, agrees that nobody wants to get dragged back into the yesterday of America, where wars were something that we were constantly involved with and tinkering on and trying to change regimes. I think that we've forgotten that we're supposed to, or the president has forgotten that he's promised to prioritize America and avoid conflict. And this seems like it'll end us up in another open-ended conflict with no off-ramp in sight, because we're now on Venezuelan soil, and we're going to blow things up for drugs. We're talking about fentanyl and other conversations, but the primary drug coming out of Venezuela is cocaine. So we're not even attacking the actual problem. We're skipping over Congress when we're making decisions to blow up boats in the water and not being clear about if people that actually had narcotics, or if there were civilians on board, or if any casualties are coming out of that. And we're in the middle of infighting within our own country and Congress about the next steps here. And President Trump seemingly is just taking the steps that he thinks are appropriate, that if you look at this with clear eyes, will involve us in foreign conflicts. And that's just the Venezuela piece. The other piece in Iran, I don't think that we would end up in a full-scale war with them. But if they're saying we're at war with them and we did bomb the nuclear facility earlier this year, it's like, well, we are asking to just ratchet it up. And even though I don't think Iran's in a position to do anything major to the United States, we're going to be at constant conflict and back and forth with this country, because now we've jumped into the best case scenario for Israel, which is still not America first.
Right. The Trump administration has to take a long, hard look in the mirror and say, are we executing on our campaign promise to be America first and to be, no new wars, no foreign entanglements, that kind of thing? I don't know how they could possibly, despite some promising things early on, despite, attempts at peace in various places that I support. I'm not saying I dislike everything they're doing, but I don't know how they could look at Israel pressuring us to do more against Iran, Venezuelan regime change without congressional authorization, blowing up boats without congressional authorization. How could they look at all of that? Israel's going to violate the peace deal in Gaza, and okay, what was that all for? Like, how can Trump say to himself, we're doing what I ran on in terms of no more foreign conflict?
Yeah, and I don't think that
Seems
he can.
Like a big mistake.
Yeah,
it seems like it's going to let down the base, frankly, and there's just way too much letting down the base right now. There's way too much pessimism now among Trump supporters, voters. They're starting to turn on each other. The media, the commentary people in MAGA world are in a civil war. The Joe Rogan, Trump voter people came into the fold. They're not happy with a lot of the immigration excesses, some other things. The coalition is fraying, and there aren't enough wins, and this is one. There's not a win on foreign policy because he's not doing what he said he was going to do.
I couldn't have bashed him better myself.
Well, it's not bashing. It's polite. It's encouragement to do more of what you said you were going to do.
Up next, the Justice Department says that the DNC and RNC pipe bomb suspect gave a detailed confession to the FBI. We're going to tell you more. Don't go anywhere. President Trump on Wednesday renewed his threats against Iran. Trump, in a Truth Social post, ordered Iran to enter nuclear talks or face potential attack by a, quote, armada of U.S. warships.
Trump writes, hopefully Iran will quickly come to the table and negotiate a fair and equitable deal. No nuclear weapons, one that is good for all parties. Time is running out. It's truly of the essence, as I told Iran once before. Make a deal. They didn't, and then there was Operation Midnight Hammer, a major destruction of Iran. The next attack will be far worse. Don't make that happen.
Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Iran's regime is probably the weakest it has ever been, and has, as the U.S. moves warships into the region.
The German Chancellor sided with Trump, saying, quote, a regime that can only hold onto power through sheer violence and terror against its own population, its days are numbered.
The Iranian mission to the United Nations responded to Trump's demands, writing on X, quote, Iran stands ready for dialogue based on mutual respect and interests, but if pushed, it will defend itself and respond like never before.
Meanwhile, Iran's neighbors and its allies, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, reiterated that their airspace, territory, and waters will not be permitted for use if military action against Iran does take place. Gregory Brew, an analyst and expert on Iran with the Eurasia Group, told The Hill this is an effort by regional states to manage their relationship with Tehran while also remaining on good terms with the United States by essentially signaling in both directions that we're not taking a side in this.
I think this is a bit of like coercive diplomacy. I mean, we can obviously see what's going on here. He's trying to talk big to Iran to get them to behave. I think when you look at what's happening in Iran, there's a natural humanitarian crisis that we'd like to address. But when people
You mean humanitarian crisis? It's of the regime.
Yeah, the regime,
dissidents.
They're like,
crisis.
I mean, the people are dying there because the regime is terrible. But Trump is falling short of saying that he wants to change the regime the same way he is in Venezuela. So the idea that he's going there to solve this crisis is kind of falls on deaf ears to me because I don't know what the actual intentions are unless you peel back the layers and see that we initiated the 12-day war with Iran because of our ties to Israel and we're protecting Israel. And so if that's the case, just say that. And people are like, okay, are we really trying to save the day in the Middle East and do regime change and have them have democratic elections? Or are we just supporting our ally? Like, what is it? And what are the motives? And then is that actually the thing on the agenda? Or does Trump want these hawkish war type people that are in the party to go to the polls in November? People just are trying to see transparently what's going on here with the America First guy doing everything internationally. I know you argue he can do two things at once, but people want to know why here, why now, when there's been chaos in the Middle East often. Like, it's not the first time Iran has been in this state. This is the worst version of it, but it's been in the state multiple years in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is now there was mass protesting and there's a desire among the people for a different regime, and they're begging the U.S. to intervene and they want something done, as was the case with Venezuela. This is very different from our previous interventions, which were imposed on a not willing population with Iraq and Libya. Syria maybe was a mixed case. These are people crying out for the U.S. to liberate them from awful authoritarian religious tyrants in the case of Iran, communist tyrants in the case of Venezuela. And I think it's a tough call on what should be done. Now, what should be done is a conversation in the halls of Congress, because I say this every single time, I do not believe the president should have the unilateral authority to make these decisions by himself. Not this specific president, but any president. And so we would have these things discussed and debated, and we would weigh the pros and cons of more intervention. And then if the American people disagreed, they could punish their leaders by voting them out of office if they don't like what they did, in the same way that Hillary Clinton was haunted by her vote to authorize the Iraq War because that ended up being unpopular among many people. That's how it's supposed to work. That's why George W. Bush, whatever you might think of him or the decision he made, was right to go to Congress and get that authority.
But we're not actually making a plan. So, in Venezuela, there's like, we left the same leadership in, an ally to Maduro. So every time people ask Trump a question, are you planning on changing leadership over there and holding fair elections, he really says that's not on the immediate agenda. So I assume it's not on the immediate agenda in Iran either. Democratic leaders are working towards a deal to avoid yet another government shutdown. I'm going to break down their list of priorities in my lens. Stick around.
President Trump seemingly threatened to intervene in Iran if they shoot or violently kill peaceful protesters who are outraged by the country's ailing economy. The Truth Social post recently, Trump wrote, "If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go."
Now, senior Iranian officials fired back, warning that U.S. intervention would spark regional chaos. Iranian parliament speaker said that Trump's threats makes, quote, all American bases and forces across the region legitimate targets in response to any possible adventurism.
Protests in the Islamic Republic have seemingly taken a violent turn, as at least 8 people have reportedly been killed so far. The protests erupted Sunday in the capital, Tehran, with crowds largely chanting about economic grievances after the country's currency hit a record low against the dollar.
Now, Tehran is still facing economic crisis after a 12-day war launched by Israel in June. Adding to the pressure, the United Nations in September reimposed sanctions on Iran over its atomic program. So the country is facing economic collapse and having some drama. I was trying to read about how the protests grew to what they are now. And I think the last straw for a lot of people and business owners was that their gas is subsidized. And then the country leaders just decided we're just going to start raising those prices to try to build revenue for only themselves. And so people are rightfully mad. But I think when you have a 12-day war that we joined forces with Israel in, and when you see what just happened in Venezuela, there's concern from Americans that say, okay, if they say they're going to target our bases, even if they don't successfully target our bases and just at least try to, any type of bomb or anything goes off, we now are in a conflict with Iran. Yes, like we have to do something about it. We can't just not respond. We can't just allow them to do whatever they want. And so people are really trying to figure out what's the plan here now that we've already continued to agitate over there and made it a point to join the side of Israel in this battle. Now we're ultimately part of, and they said they were at war with us, I think like a week ago. They said that they feel that they're in a war with us, even though we might not take that claim seriously. That's where the country feels they are with the
They
US.
can't do, right. They can harass our bases, our soldiers. They can't do anything to the homeland. Look, I've all sympathy, of course, to the protesters there. They are right. They are justified. I hope they succeed someday in toppling their authoritarian Islamic extremist government. The justification for Venezuela that's being presented by the administration is that Venezuela is culturally more like, it's part of the Americas. It is socially, culturally, religiously not so far afield as the Middle East. Like they're contrasting it, saying we can do this. Venezuela won't be like Iraq because it's a different place. Won't be like Afghanistan. Okay, but you can't make that argument for Iran. So what are we doing here? I would urge Trump saying, we're going to attack them too? We're going to be at war with everyone? Now what about no new wars? What about America first? Again, if it's a limited one-time thing for just Venezuela, because this is, okay, maybe you can sell me on that. I'm not sure I'm totally convinced. Maybe you can sell me on that. You can't sell me on us coming in and doing regime change in Iran. That's a neocon fantasy. Maybe that's an Israeli fantasy or Israeli government fantasy. What are we doing here? That is clearly violating the America First ethos and has maybe, unlike Venezuela might have a significant chance of success. I don't know how significant it is. An Iran thing does not have a significant chance of successfully bringing about a tolerant, pro-Western American government. Let's be very realistic here. So cool your jets on this one is what I would say.
We have to go based off what's happened in the last few months, from the 12-day war to Hegseth recently saying Iran had their chance, and then saying that every adversary of the U.S. should, quote, remain on notice because they'll get anybody back anywhere, anytime. He said that we will protect anytime, anywhere. How is it our job to protect the citizens over there, specifically if the government is doing what President Trump noted they've always done? And not to say that's right or wrong, but as we continue to be the world police and say, oh, we're going to send troops on the ground, we're going to put who we want in charge. I mean, we've tried that. It's almost like insanity when you try to do something over and over again and expect different results. And so we're just in this limbo of...
Right. Policing our own hemisphere is one thing. That is a ideology I can maybe grapple with or try to understand, but we can't just go back to the policing the world, Bush era thing that Trump ran on repudiating and was successful electorally for that reason.
Now, healthcare premiums for millions are skyrocketing following the expiration of ACA subsidies. I'll have more on that in my lens. Stick around.
The State Department is warning U.S. citizens to leave Iran immediately. President Donald Trump is weighing military actions as the government's violent crackdown on protests continues. From Armenia to London, demonstrators outside the Iranian embassy called for the fall of Iran's government, waving flags of Iran before its Islamic revolution.
We are their voice in this country.
Those protests are in solidarity with demonstrations in Iran. The oppressive regime has cut off text messaging and the internet during days of protests that started late last year. Activists say at least 500 protesters have been killed and more than 10,000 detained.
The president has shown he's unafraid to use military options if and when he deems necessary.
President Donald Trump threatened military action if the Iranian regime killed protesters. It came to power after Iranians overthrew the U.S.-backed Shah in 1979. President Trump is expected to meet with national security leaders this week to review options for military action. The White House says his envoy, Steve Witkoff, is also trying diplomacy.
What you're hearing publicly from the Iranian regime is quite differently from the messages the administration is receiving privately. And I think the president has an interest in exploring those messages.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says he thinks the Iranian regime is in its final days and weeks, as President Trump is increasing the economic pressure on Iran, announcing 25% tariffs on anything imported from countries that do business with Iran. Those include countries like China, India, Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey. In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlot. Back to you. The U.S. military is moving a carrier strike group from the South China Sea to the Central Command region, which includes the Middle East. The USS Gerald Ford is still in the Caribbean. The U.S. moved it there ahead of the operation to remove the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. And the U.S. military has moved officials out of a base in Qatar as President Trump has threatened military strikes on Iran. More than 2,000 protesters in Iran have been killed, according to activists, and Iran's chief judge this week signaled fast trials and executions for people detained during nationwide protests. President Donald Trump said Wednesday he's been assured the executions won't happen.
We have been informed by very important sources on the other side, and they've said the killing has stopped and the executions won't take place.
President Trump's ally, Senator Lindsey Graham, says he disagrees, writing, "The death toll is mounting by the hour."
They told me that there'll be no executions, and so I hope that's true.
The protests began when the value of the Iranian rial plunged just before the new year, the same week as the U.S. military operation to capture Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro.
And I think we're getting along very well with Venezuela. Yes.
On Wednesday, President Trump says he spoke with the former vice president of Venezuela, who the U.S. installed to replace Maduro, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance met with the foreign ministers of Greenland and Denmark about President Trump's push to take over Greenland.
We need Greenland for national security.
The island is controlled by Denmark, a U.S. ally. European officials pushed back, warning U.S. action could hurt the NATO alliance.
We made it very, very clear that this is not in the interest of the kingdom.
Today, President Trump will meet with the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. Some Republicans have pushed for her to take over as the leader of Venezuela, but President Trump says right now she does not have the support in that country. In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlot. Back to you.
President Trump says a massive fleet of U.S. ships is heading toward Iran as the country continues its deadly crackdown on protests.
President Trump is threatening military action against Iran, citing the country's plans for mass executions and its killing of peaceful protesters.
837, mostly young men, were going to be hung on Thursday. And I said, if you hang those people, you're going to be hit harder than you've ever been hit.
The president claims Iran canceled those hangings, though Iran's top prosecutor denies that. So far, more than 5,000 people have been killed in the protest crackdown, according to the U.S.-based human rights activists news agency. And now, an American aircraft carrier group is moving closer to the Middle East.
We have a massive fleet heading in that direction, and maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see.
Tensions with Iran have been high since the country began a violent crackdown on protests that started December 28th over the collapse of Iran's currency. Iranian authorities have cut off access to the internet since January 8th.
I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching it very closely.
Iran's foreign minister said if attacked, the country will, quote, fire back with everything we have.
President Trump also said countries that do business with Iran will soon face a 25% tariff. In Washington, I'm Maddie Beertemple.
Welcome back, everybody. U.S. officials gearing up for a new round of high-stakes talks with Iran tomorrow in Geneva.
Yeah, at the White House, President Trump is not ruling out an attack to force Iran to rein in its nuclear program. News Nation's senior congressional correspondent Joe Khalil has details from the White House for us this morning. So, Joe, the U.S. reportedly ready for weeks of fighting if tensions ultimately boil over here. What do you know?
Yeah, and it seems to make the discussions coming up this week a lot more high stakes, because if you're asking whether the U.S. is preparing for military action or for diplomacy, the answer is actually a little of both. On Tuesday, you're going to have Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, leading this delegation, meeting with high-level Iranian officials, again, over its nuclear program and several other topics. But according to a Reuters report citing two U.S. officials, the U.S. is also simultaneously preparing for a military campaign that could last for several weeks. So again, you're hearing that kind of rhetoric from both the Trump administration and from Iranian officials as well. It sort of makes the discussions all the more high stakes as they're leading into this Geneva discussion that they're going to have. This is what Secretary Rubio said when sort of framing the expectations for whether a deal can come through, whether there will be any sort of diplomatic breakthrough between the two nations. Take a listen here.
We're dealing with people who make geopolitical decisions on the basis of pure theology, and it's a complicated thing. I mean, no one's ever been able to do a successful deal with Iran, but we're going to try.
Meantime, through the weekend, this is what you have here. Scenes like this in cities all across the world. The Iranian diaspora here, they have been protesting for months now, calling on President Trump, urging him to stick to his word. What they're asking for is a removal of the current Iranian regime. We've been seeing that now for some time, led by opposition leaders. Meantime, President Trump from Fort Bragg said on Friday that regime change could be the outcome that would be the best, he said. And again, that framing sort of putting the Iranian side on its heels a bit. This is the response from the Iranian deputy foreign minister when asked about potential American strikes within Iran.
It will be traumatic. It is not as if that Iran will suffer only. Everybody will suffer, particularly those who have initiated this aggression. If we feel that this is an existential threat, we will respond accordingly.
Now keep in mind, as the U.S. puts the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group just off the coast of Iran there are also several American military bases all throughout the Middle East and the region, which is something that certainly the Department of Defense is going to have to keep its eye on as tensions rise, if in fact they do, if there's no diplomatic breakthrough.
All right, Joe Khalil, live at the White House. We appreciate it.